Hi everyone, it's Team Reacts with Catherine, your content manager today. And we're going to be talking about mental health, which is an incredibly serious issue and one that affects so many of our kids every day. So, I think all of us, at least anyone who's watched the news or had a child in their lives, knows that there is a mental health crisis among our kids. And it's important that we address that. It's also important that we stay informed. So let's dive into it and see what new material we have and what the newest update is.
When you're doing middle school health, do you spend much time talking about mental health and wellness with them?
We do.
Oh, nice. What's that? What does that look like?
That was our first, I believe that was our first unit of the school year.
Oh my gosh, we never did this.
Love it. I'm so glad that we do go over it. Our counselors in the past have come in and taken one day and have spoke with them about it. And the words anxiety, they're thrown out a lot now. Depression's thrown out a lot now. So a lot of things that we like to do along with the counselors is tell the students, if you have a bad day, you're not depressed. We all have bad days. What you need to start looking at is if you're having bad days for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, then
more bad than good days.
Right. Then we need to get you some help and have a chat more.
I mean, I think that there's two important things to take away here. One, that they're actually talking about it in school and they didn't wait. They're talking about it first thing as soon as class starts, which is important. And the second thing that I really love about the teacher, I think it's the teacher in pink that says it. And she brings up the point that we need to explain what depression actually is, because that's part of the problem. It's like we as a society, but especially us younger generations, we've heard these like buzzwords of depression, anxiety, but we don't know what they are necessarily, right? Like we throw them around so much and we hear them. They're like, in the background all the time, but what do they actually mean? And so I think it's so important that she explains to her kids on the first day, hey, if you have a bad day, that doesn't mean you're depressed. But this is what depression is. Depression means if you have a string of bad days, if life feels really dark, and then she goes on, but come to me, like come talk to somebody, right? And I know there's some pushback nowadays that teachers shouldn't be addressing mental health issues, but I think we have to. Like, I've worked in education now for almost a decade, and I have to say that, like, this is a huge, it's here, it's in our faces. So we can either get equipped and do something about it, or we can sit back. I'm not necessarily advocating that teachers need to be counselors by any stretch of the imagination, or that teachers need to be parents. That's also very, very different. But I think we as teachers or tutors or educators, whatever our capacity is, we need to educate ourselves on mental health, and we need to educate ourselves how to recognize the signs in our children. But more on that later. Let's go on to video number 2.
Hey, Dave and Carmela. I'm taking a mental health day since more schools are allowing it.
Well, you're allowed to take a mental health day.
But this isn't a school, right?
Child mental health problems are on the rise.
You're 23.
A dozen states let students take off for mental health reasons.
How did you do that?
And a handful of others are considering similar proposals.
I need to know that you know that this is an office.
But Chris, what if you miss schoolwork?
Oh my God.
You make it up, just like with other absences. I'm gonna go home and watch Marvel cartoons.
That part makes sense to me.
Okay, controversial opinion, but I'm actually in favor of kids getting mental health days. And here's why. Because stats show that kids, when they go through massive moves, when their parents are going through divorces, when major life events are happening to them, they do poorly in school. So why not just let them take a mental health day or two, take that time? I think it would be even better if we use those mental health days and partner somehow with parents. And we're like, hey, parents, on these days, this is what quality mental health looks like. This is what taking care of mental health looks like. And let those kids have those days. But also, yes, maybe they do watch Marvel cartoons. I'm not against that either. But also, not just giving a day off, but giving a day off with the proper tools and skills. And that's obviously going to be a partnership with the parents, right? Because the parents are the ones at home and the ones with the kid probably on that mental health day. But yeah, I'm absolutely for it. I'm for mental health days in the workforce too, which I know is incredibly controversial. You can't have people just taking off all the time. But also, again, if it's a major life event or it's actually real depression, then yes, you'll probably be more productive if you just have the 24 hours and come back. And I can say that both as an employee and as a manager. When I've been a manager and able to give staff days off because of company policy, it's so much better as opposed to oh my goodness, I wish I could give you a mental health day, but I can't. And the whole workflow suffers. So yes, sometimes we all just need to go watch our Marvel cartoons. In moderation, of course. in moderation. Like, I'm not saying this should be a crutch for like, I need to go Christmas shopping. Because come on, we all know someone who's taken like their sick leave and then bumped into them on Black Friday, right? That's a gray area, but I believe in like giving people the benefit of the doubt. So, all right, video number 3.
When I talk to my son, he'll tell me if you talk to any of his classmates, they will all tell you some condition that they have. There's a part of me that wants to say, I'm sympathetic to that. And then there's a part of me that wants to just go, you're 16. We all went through it. Go outside. You don't have to get into discussion groups to try to figure out what's wrong with you. I feel like that's exacerbating the problem.
Well, I can understand that perspective. I could have benefited a great deal in high school by a group of my peers talking about their problems and how we can solve them. Where is the point where we solve the issue with the individual who's going through that kind of pain? I think that we're just lacking in that education. We don't always have to solve it with pills. We can really work hard to take the things that better balance a person's mental well-being in general and enact them into our daily lives and make them part of our routine, which is what I do. I have a 10-step routine that I use every day to stabilize, and only one of them is medication. That's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the answer.
All right, I love this video because I think it shows the two sides of the coin that I was talking about earlier with the mental health days. And like, yes, we shouldn't be taking advantage of them, or like, yes, or going back to the depression thing, like we need to explain what these things are, but then we also need to provide support. So yes, on the one hand, I think there is kind of an epidemic of self-diagnosis, especially with advent of TikTok becoming so popular, you know, and then teenagers and others are able to be exposed to more diagnoses than we even knew existed before. I mean, they did exist, but they weren't common terms used in society, such as dissociative disorder. So I'll be very vulnerable here for a second, but I, as a teenager, thought that I had dissociative identity disorder because I had watched videos, and I did have a lot of dissociative tendencies, but I did not have that particular disorder. I just had dissociative tendencies, and it was a part of growing up, right? Like the first guy said, we all struggle with growing up. We all go through this. But on the other hand, I think that it would have been a huge benefit for me had there been a peer support group, had there been a safe space to go and someone say, yes, those are normal feelings, or even if they didn't say they're normal, even if they just said, hey, we understand and here's support and here's how you can work through those disassociative feelings, instead of being forced to like be alone and try to survive videos in the hopes that someone somewhere would have an answer for me. I love the two sides here. On the one hand, like, yes, we need to explain to kids that growing up is hard and there are going to be bad days and there's going to be anxiety and there's going to be stress. But on the other side, you may not have one of these disorders that are getting thrown around and getting self-diagnosed, and we need to avoid self-diagnoses. We also need to avoid just like shoving pills down our kids' throats, but providing support groups, providing a safe space so that they can express those feelings and say, I am feeling anxiety. I think I might have depression. I think I might have DID. There needs to be a safe space for that and those conversations to happen. All right, so the first article that we have today is, should schools provide mental health services? And that's a tricky topic. And I think this article, you can find it on NWEF. I believe that this is a tricky subject, and the article does a really fantastic job of showing both sides of this. So kind of where the question started was when the program Typical or Troubled was developed by the American Psychiatric Foundation, according to this article. The goal of this program is to educate teachers, school psychologists, social workers, and other school staff on how to identify warning signs of mental illness in children and work with their parents and doctor to find a solution. If a child or teen is identified as having the symptoms of mental illness, they may be examined by a medical professional and potentially diagnosed and put on medication. This ties in really well with our last video. I can't help but thinking about it. I love that it says identify warning sign and work with the parents and doctors to find a solution. That's essentially what the other guy was saying. I disagree with the potential to be put on medication as being like our first line of resources. I love the second guy in the last video who was talking about how he has a 10-step program. Medication happens to be one of them. And we need to make sure as a society that we aren't just pushing pills into kids' mouths, but they may need pills. And when they do, it is A-okay and 100% acceptable. But like, what other steps are we putting in place? How are we partnering with parents? How are we developing plans as a community to support these children? Miami-Dade in Florida has a very extensive program, but most schools as a whole, this is what it says about most. Usually schools have school counselors, psychologists, nurses, and social workers in place to support students. So still quite a lot in each school district. Although this is the government's goal for every public school, often schools face staffing challenges in these departments. So not all of these people and their services are always available. I've worked with interviewees who were school counselors, and they admitted that they were like weird, sometimes so swamped with all the kids that we have to take care of. So what are the functions of these various groups? Where it goes on to say, social workers work with students to promote their overall health and well-being, especially in psychosocial functioning, whereas school counselors focus on student success and strive to have equity in their schools, while school psychologists specialize in behavior analysis to meet kids' learning, health, and behavioral needs. So in an ideal world, it sounds to me like we would be taking care of their mental, physical, and social well-being. But is that also the case? Okay, so positively, according to this part of the article, it says, by spreading positivity and healthy habits and virtues, we lower the risk of sadness, depression, suicide, and shootings. That's fantastic. We are always looking for ways to lower shootings. This is a real problem in America. The National Library of Medicine conducted a study that showed that by applying group training and individual counseling in the schools, improves mental health. They suggest that identifying student problems and parent-teacher cooperation, as well as consulting with specialist counselors, can be effective in providing practical and effective solutions. So this sounds amazing. So what is is there a dark side to this? I don't know. But according to this article, it goes on to say, the dark side of mental health programs in schools. For instance, ADHD is the most diagnosed mental health disorder in children. However, according to a doctor the New York Times interviewed, sometimes children are diagnosed with the disorder and prescribed medication even when they do not have ADHD. Now that is a very huge problem. Why? Why would we do that? Why would you do that, especially to a child? The New York Times says they are prescribing stimulants to struggling students in schools starved of extra money, not to treat ADHD necessarily, but to boost their academic performance. The doctor was quoted saying, it's too expensive to modify the kid's environment, so we have to modify the kid. That makes me so incredibly angry. Every kid deserves the same treatment. Every kid deserves the same health. It doesn't matter if they're poor or not. And just because they are coming from a poor school district, they deserve to be worked with just as much as if they came from a wealthy school district. We shouldn't just be giving them pills to behave. One, I want to know what is happening there. Like, what are the administrators doing? What are the teachers doing? What is happening? In what world would you think medicating a child that doesn't need to be medicated is okay? If this is actually happening, which, I mean, it is the New York Times, and they are one of our largest newspapers in America, so you would think they would get that right. There are also regional disparities in ADHD diagnosis that seem to be linked to funding. Child Mind Institute reports that a child in Kentucky is 3 times as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD as a child in Nevada. That hurts even worse because I'm from the South. I see these school districts on a routine basis. They don't have money. Why? In some states, school funding is closely tied to test scores. If the kids do well academically, the school receives more funding. I can say, as someone who's worked in these districts, that is 100% true. One expert suggests if kids who are struggling with ADHD treated, it should improve their functioning in school and hence their test scores. So essentially, I believe what this article is saying, or what this research is saying, they're basically quoting all of these other experts here, is that the school wants money, and they get money if their test scores go up, and their test scores don't go up unless the kid is medicated to the point that they work. The test scores would also go up if they simply worked with the child according to their learning needs, but that would require actually giving enough teachers so that their classrooms aren't huge, they're not understaffed to the point of exhaustion. Maybe actually having a special program for those children. But, why would we do that when we could just push some pills, give money to Big Pharma, get those test scores up, and the administrator can look good for the year? Or the administration. I wouldn't put this on one person. I would say that this is probably in these cases is a district problem that involves multiple people, school board members looking at you, administrators looking at you, if this is indeed the case, as it seems to be, because there's at least 5 articles cited here, 5 different studies. So going back to the article, remember, typical or troubled? Training teachers and school staff to recognize mental disorders seems like a positive improvement. But the typical or troubled program is sponsored by 3 pharmaceutical companies that make psychotropic drugs, according to CNS News. Maybe there's a conflict of interest here. If children are diagnosed, the pharmaceutical companies collect. They have a very good reason to make sure that happens. Wow. There's no words except our kids deserve better. They deserve better. And this doesn't fall on one particular group. I think this falls on community because ultimately it takes a village. So this falls on leadership. This falls on school boards. This falls on administration. This falls on superintendents. This falls on teachers. This falls on parents. We have got to work together, because only when we work together, no one person in that chain can totally change and make kids' lives better. But if we all work together, we can. Thanks so much for listening in today and going down this journey with me to explore children's mental health in ways that we can partner together to build that community and build that village that they need. So I would point out, if you're a parent or a teacher, we have our school board member, we have an amazing website, NWEF.org. Our blog is part of what I oversee, and there's one great article in there. If you do nothing else, I would love for you to read the article, Teachers, Are Your Students Struggling with Mental Health? It's great for teachers, but it's also a wonderful reference for anyone else, because it just lists 5 very common and easy signs to recognize in children to see if they're struggling with mental health. And then from there, you know your child best or your student best. And so from there, we can make those calls. Do they need to go to a counselor? Do they need medication? Do they need a mental health day? Do they need to learn breathing techniques at home? Like, okay, count to 10 and take deep breaths. I mean, it may be as simple as that. But if we don't catch it in the beginning stages and teach those things, then we can't expect them to go through life and it not get worse. You have to catch it early, and you have to give them the tools that they need. And that's my personal opinion. Anyway, thanks for coming along for the ride, and I